Hello everybody, I'm Conquering History Games, and welcome to Kalterkrieg Progress Report number 3, where we're going to be going over the Russian state under the Vozhd himself, Boris Savinkov. I'm going to continue to be doing the audiobook style readings of these, because I've been getting lots of positive responses from people about me doing it. But I'm going to be doing something a little different today. What I'm going to do is, after I go through the whole report, and it is a big report, we're going to then flip back to a couple of the pictures, and I'm just going to give a little bit of commentary on it. Not too much, because I'm sure the video is going to be long enough already. Also, I'm going to be using the term I in quotation marks, but I am not the one who wrote this report. The person who wrote it, his name is Galushnikov, and he's apparently the person who is in charge of the Russian lore. So we're going to be starting by talking about the pre-Kalterkrieg lore, explaining what the starting situation is, the last years of Savinkov's rule, and then what happens after he dies, culminating in the Russian winter. Okay, so let's get started in 1936, united and indivisible Russia. Following the assassination of President Kerensky and the military putsch in Moscow, Savinkov inherited a Russia that had been mired by nearly 2 decades of political gridlock, corruption, and apathy. Because of this, it's no surprise that much of the demoralized nation was willing to put their faith behind the newly declared Vozhd. The recently established Russian state quickly got to work, making up for the decades of decay suffered under the old republic. While it would be impossible to catch up to the Reichspakt in both military and industrial power in just a few short years, the first 4-year plan and the establishment of institutions such as the Goskom and Labor Army made great progress. This progress was at a price, and prices must be paid. To uphold order against any who would dissent against this new regime, the State Political Administration, aka the GPU, was established to monitor the nation. Those deemed to be traitors were often dealt with by the newly nationalized combat squads, now called the Nacgvardia, or National Guard. Following the first few years of reform and modernization, the Russian military finally got its first opportunity to bear its fangs. In the latter half of 1938, the Revolutionary Army of the Russian state launched a full-scale invasion of Central Asia. While the swift invasion and brutal subsequent occupation was met with condemnation globally, more pressing issues allowed this exercise in wide-front operations to go unpunished. The practice was vital for the Revolutionary Army, as a much larger war loomed on the horizon. The Great Patriotic War, 1941 to 1947. June 1940 saw the beginning of the Second Weltkrieg on the Western Front, and the start of preparations in Russia. Military supplies were stockpiled, soldiers were drilled daily, and factories were run around the clock. The time to strike drew near. March 1941 saw the Russian annexation of the Don Cossack Union, with nothing more than a diplomatic protest from the besieged Germany. This bit of brinksmanship by Moscow was all they needed to test Berlin, and Berlin blinked. Russian soldiers flooded southern Russia and the border with the Reichspakt. Nothing could stop the inevitable. At the end of May, the Russian state set their demands to Berlin: the immediate annexation of Azerbaijan, Georgia, Belarus, and Karelia. Berlin was quick to reject these demands. The war on the Ostfront was now inevitable. On June 1st, the Russian state launched a full-scale invasion of the Caucasus, with Azerbaijan and Georgia following within the week. The Revolutionary Army then turned their attention to the west, conducting offensives into the Reichspakt's Ostatin, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic Duchy, and Finland. The Russians would see early successes in the war, capturing Estonia, Belarus, Crimea, and the eastern half of Ukraine. Kyiv in particular would remain a battleground for almost the entirety of the war. By the end of the year, the Revolutionary Army had broken into southern Ukraine and besieged Odessa. However, these massive offensives were costly, and the Revolutionary Army had begun to suffer from material shortages. These setbacks would evolve into a crisis, as the Danubian Federation entered the war in 1942, bringing much-needed manpower and equipment to the Reichspakt. The siege of Odessa would be broken by autumn of 1942, with major losses for the Russians. But fortune would favor the Revolutionary Army in the north. Summer of 1942 saw the collapse of the Riga-Vilnius line, allowing Russian forces to break into Courland in Lithuania. By 1943, there would be Russian boots on German and Polish soil, with heavy fighting in Memel and western Poland. These propaganda victories would be used to direct attention away from the faltering southern front, where in 1944 a joint German, Danubian, Ukrainian offensive would rout the Revolutionary Army back across the Dnieper. Only after a transfer of units from the fighting in Kiev would the Revolutionary Army be able to force the Reichspakt alliance back over the river. Forces in the north would similarly be bogged down in heavy fighting in Poland and eastern Prussia. It wouldn't be until October of that year that their battered forces finally reached Königsberg and Warsaw. But the urban fighting would only further weaken the Revolutionary Army, calling off the offensive as both sides began to look for opportunities elsewhere along the front. But fortune would not favor the Russians, as news of France's surrender in December 1945 spelled doom for the Revolutionary Army. Now millions of German soldiers raced across Europe to meet the Russian foe with a renewed fury. April 1946 saw the commencement of Fall Augustus, starting to push the Revolutionary Army out of eastern Prussia and Poland. The Russians would make Germany and her allies bleed for every inch they recaptured, but total victory had slipped from the Vzohd's grasp. After a disastrous encirclement in Courland, German Marines landing in Crimea, and the atomic bombing of Britain, the Russians and Germans agreed on a ceasefire. The war in the East was over. For now. The final years of Savinkov, 1948 to 1950. 1st of January, 1948. The dust now settles. The people of Russia's major cities breathe a sigh of relief in the knowledge that their homes will not suffer the same fate as Portsmouth. For now. However, the nation mourns. While the soldiers of the Revolutionary Army march through the Red Square, many a mother sobs over the death of her husband, brother, and son. Many did not return home. And for what? A ceasefire? Was the Great Patriotic War really worth it? For some it wasn't, and calls for a concrete peace begin to echo throughout the nation. But this alone will not reverse more than a decade of rule by the NRPR. Savinkov and his party have kept a tight grip on the Russian state. A few protests cannot change that. As the years pass on, Russia falls further and further from the world stage, becoming weaker by the moment. However, the Vozhd does not see it this way. He believes that with every moment Russia is shut out from the outside world, the stronger she becomes. Despite the economic ruin brought on by the Great Patriotic War, Savinkov continues to look into new ways to rebuild and strengthen the military. One of these ways is the building of a nuclear weapon. However, Boris Savinkov is not alone in the upper echelons of Russia's government. A number of political actors are in play at this early stage of the Kalterkrieg, many with their own agendas. So there's going to be 6 events here. We're going to talk about these later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. This is the Russian starting tree. No man lives forever, and Savinkov's time has begun to run out. In these final few years of Vzohd's life, the player will be tasked with deciding the fate of the newly liberated territories, rebuilding the military, and working towards Project Varangian. The death of Savinkov. At 5 o'clock Moscow time, the news everyone feared arrived. The Vozhd is dead. In the immediate aftermath of this news, an emergency meeting of the Presidium is called. In light of growing protests, expected to only intensify after the announcement of the Vzohd's death, Shikhamatov, Vernadsky, and Shepelov decide to consolidate power in a troika. The news of Savinkov's death has only emboldened the protesters, seeing this as an opportunity to petition for sweeping changes in Russia. This time of mass and unrest and uncertainty has come to be known as the Russian anarchy. To simulate the ensuing anarchy, we have created a minigame, designed by yours truly and implemented by Tassos with help from Kennedy. The players must manage 3 different things: the size of the protest, how violent those protests are, and the army's attitude towards the government's handling of the protests. The decisions all have predictable effects, lowering the size of protests or their rowdiness, but over time, the army will continue to get angrier unless you are able to contain them. If the protests continue to grow more violent and widespread, the Revolutionary Army will decide to handle them for the government, resulting in a military coup. However, if the player is able to keep the army happy and contain the protests, the troika will survive the year and go on to deal with their aftermath. The Defense Committee of the Revolutionary Army. Before I continue into Russia's troika path, I do wish to give a little sneak peek into the junta path. Following the overthrow of the NRPR's civilian government and the violent quashing of the protests, the Defense Committee of the Revolutionary Army works quickly to secure its power. The committee quickly declares popular war hero Nikolai Vatunin Vozhd. If the player picks this path, they may have avoided a more destructive future, but they will struggle to balance the legitimacy of the junta, the demands of the people, and the inevitable rise in corruption. The troika survives. However, if you do wish to continue down the path of the troika and pledge yourself to defending Vozhd's legacy, then it's in your best interest to quell the Russian anarchy before the army gets involved. If you are able to pull that off, then the troika will declare victory, and you'll be tasked with dealing with the aftermath of the anarchy. However, not all is harmonious in the collective leadership of the Russian state. The three members of the troika soon begin to drift apart, as their differing interpretations of Savinkov's ideology begin to surface. The three men begin gathering their supporters, splitting the NRPR into factions based around each of them. The future is uncertain, but the dissolution of the troika is inevitable. After months of bickering and fighting, things come to a head at the 1951 Party Congress. The planned confirmation of Tisiatsky Shikamatov's ascension into Vozhd is blocked by supporters of both Shepelov and Vernadsky. Things only spiral into further chaos as the troika falls to pieces in an incredibly public manner. The dissolution launches a new crisis as the Russian people begin to divide themselves along the ideological lines of each of the troika members. Violence on the level of the Russian anarchy soon breaks out. Each member of the now former troika works to consolidate their power and calls upon their allies, which leads us to the second half of the troika tree. The die has been cast. The party is fractured beyond repair. The winter will soon be upon Russia, but that is a story for another progress report. There are a few more things I'd like to share with you all that I couldn't quite fit into the little story I had going on in this progress report, so here they are. This is a list of Russian generals at game start. This is the updated Russian political screen. And finally, here is every possible head of state in version 0.1. Those eyebrows look awfully familiar. Oh well. Okay, so there's a couple of more things. That's pretty much the end of the report, but I want to go back and look at some of the ones that I skipped initially. Okay, so these are just a couple of events that we skipped over. There's 6 of them in particular. This one is just specifically talking about Savinkov, how he's old, kind of elaborating on him and showing that he's sick. The second one here is his deputy, Shcherzinsky Shikamatov, who we talked about earlier. He's like his heir apparent in the troika. He's all about like holy, sacred, pure Russia. Very anti, syndicalist, communist style thinking. Here's the general secretary, Shepelov. So this is the law student, an anti-corruption kind of guy. Loyal to Vozhd and the party, but could maybe be seen as revisionist. The whole idea is he conservative or hardliner? What's going on there? We've got our foreign minister, Vernadsky, son of a famed geologist. So this is a guy who used to be a cadet. So like the cadets were, I'm trying to remember what they are in Kaiserreich. I don't remember if they're the market liberals or the social liberals, but it's kind of interesting because it shows how like in different countries, and this is true in real life, like, where you stand politically is not always the same. So like maybe in the United States, for example, if you were thinking of somebody as being a market liberal, you'd think of them as being center-right. But you got to remember that in real life, a lot of the people who become the cadets in Kaiserreich were ones who spent time, exiled to Siberia for something or another, just like the communists were. All of that was still too progressive and socially minded for the government of the Tsar. So yeah, this is basically saying that he's somebody who's still plotting stuff, very cloak and dagger. We're We're not quite sure what is going on there with him. And I think there was one more. Yes, the Marshal. So this is the one who could end up leading the junta. So this is basically saying that he was really successful in the Northern Front during the Great Patriotic War. So maybe we could kind of compare him to like a Zhukov style figure. He's popular. There's people who would like to maybe see him be the Vozhd one day. People like him used to be purged, but apparently he hasn't been. Maybe that's because Savinkov is getting too old to recognize the threat. Maybe it's because Savinkov actually likes him. So yeah, here's your junta guy. And I think that was it. Oh, wait, no, yeah, one more. The Commissar and the Natsvardia. These are the combat squads being led by Pavel Gorgolov, an army of fanatic thugs loyal to only three things: him, the Vozhd, and Russia. Nuclear option in case anyone decides his time as Vozhd has come to an end. So kind of a secret police coup as opposed to the military coup option, it seems like. And then that brings us back over here. Was there anything else in particular I wanted to point out? Yeah, let's see. Savinkov's going to die. So yeah, troika is only going to be temporary, but as you see, this huge cut to political power gain, but it is only going to be a temporary thing. You know, mini games are fun. I think they're a good way to kill time when you're before you get to fighting the army arrows. It's very interesting to me that they're hiding most of the junta tree, but you know, they said they're gonna get into more detail about it later. Yeah, and then this is This is just showing like their different ideologies here. So like here's the deputy Vozhd. He's talking about Slavic power, Russian power. Verdnansky is actually praising the Danubian Federation. So yeah, like right here. Glory to Russia and all her people. Which is like controversial, but it seems to be like implying it's like there's more than just the Russians. Like we have Ukrainians in here, the Belarusians, all that, so it's all one people. So this is kind of like the reformist branch, I think. And then yeah, and then Shitamatov is still wants to, I guess, like revanchist. He still wants to go after the Germans. Well, the kind of both of these guys in the left and the right, they want to still go after the Germans. Yeah, Vienna and Berlin must be razed to the ground. All right, so that's it. I'm Conquering History Games. Thank you for joining me for today's report. And hope you are as interested to see the Russian state in the future as I am. And yeah, this Russian winter, it looks like it's going to fall apart. And yet they've blacked out a lot of the outside spots. I'm wondering what's going on out there in Siberia. Curious, very curious. And anyway, y'all have yourselves a very pleasant day.